Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. This week, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I am enjoying the spring 2025 weather. I thought I'd throw that in just in case someone's listening in the future. Um, yeah. I was reminded of something this morning that could be relevant to our discussion today.
Excellent.
That of course everyone's response to a song is subjective because although we are in 2025 and we are talking about late 1965, I want to transport you back to June 1962, when Pete Best was still in the band and the Beatles had recorded "Bésame Mucho" as part of their, audition, and of course they did play it live as well. Well, over here in the UK, dear American listeners and those from other parts of the world, the BBC has a really interesting program called Soul Music, in which people talk about a song and what it means to them. And this morning, Radio 4 broadcast one on Besame Mucho. And I've always thought of it as a bit of a joke song because I think the Beatles version is a bit of a joke. But there were some really profound stories about the lyrical meaning and what it meant to people, and about the whole notion of this might be the last dance that I have with you, and some really powerful stories for couples whose song it was, but then perhaps one of the couple has died, or there was an example where someone had dementia as well, but it's still lyrically, it didn't make the people sad. It still sort of reminded them of the wonderful relationships that they had. And the reason for mentioning that, it might seem a little bit obtuse, is that I think lyrically today's song will divide us. But then that's just a reminder that everyone receives the song within their own context.
Okay,
So that
that's
was
a
an interesting
really
one. Yeah, I'd never thought of Besame Mucho in that regard before, and maybe I'll be a little bit more thoughtful before being incredibly dismissive about trite lyrics.
I find that unlikely, but we can always live in hope. It's an interesting song, Besame Mucho. But you're right, the Beatles version is basically just a piss take. It's done in the same style as they do, oh, I don't know, my name, look up the number or something like that. It's done in an intentionally cheesy style, but that does take away from the quality of
Hmm.
the original sometimes, even although it's still entertaining in its own right. I guess we've been talking for a few minutes now. We should probably mention that we are, in fact, talking about Think for Yourself
They
today.
can work it out for themselves,
Yeah,
can't
well,
they?
I mean, it's in the episode title. I'm sure it's
You don't need to tell
deducible.
them. You don't need to lead them.
No, but I still like to mention it. It's just one of those formalities. But anyway, yes, that's what we're doing today, and yeah, that's really interesting. So you think this song is going to divide us? So why don't you kick us off, and then we'll see where we end off with that.
Well, no, I don't think the song is going to divide us. I think lyrically we might have different interpretations of whether or not it is wholly effective.
Okay, all right.
Um, and I think the reason for that is because um, I don't think George, I mean, certainly when reflecting on it some years later, he couldn't remember whether his intention was to write something political or something personal. He couldn't remember whether or not he had been piqued by the government of the day or something politically, or whether it was based upon a relationship. And actually, it's quite hard to tell, but you could argue the case for both. And I think the vagueness for me, and the fact that I've used the word vagueness, kind of hints at where I'm going. It lets the song down lyrically, which is a shame because there's a real attempt to write something different in here. And if it is political, that's fine. I actually I'd be quite happy with that if it was something saying, well, okay, right, government of the day, ooh, aren't they bad? Ooh, people, ooh, do something different. Ooh, don't believe what the papers tell you. Okay, that's fine. That would be different, and something relatively unique for pop music at the time. But if, on the other hand, it's a personal song, then it's quite vicious and nasty. And that is something that does appear elsewhere in George's writing. And I think that's a shame given how he has presented himself as someone who is more enlightened at times.
Well, we're certainly really pre-Enlightenment period at this stage of George's development. That didn't come out the way I expected it
But it
to.
could he just be
Um,
stepping into the light at this point,
Well,
maybe?
I mean, he'd have started the investigation, I suppose. We've had help, we've had satires, we've had the piquing of his interest, but I don't think we're quite at that stage yet. You know, we're pre the trip to Wales with the Maharaja and all that kind of stuff. So there may be an interest there, but he's certainly not at that fully fledged kind of point in his life yet. I You see, what you call vague, I say is pleasing ambiguity. I like the fact, I like the fact that it's an ambiguous lyric, and I really like the fact that you can take it as either political or personal. If it is political, then it's streets ahead of Lennon is typically thought of as the political writer in the Beatles, and it's streets ahead of anything that he has written in terms of politics at this point. I don't. Next week we have the word coming up, and that will be a whole separate discussion. But it's if it's political, it's incredibly direct, and if it's personal, it's incredibly nasty.
And politically, it's also, if it is political, it's streets ahead of Taxman, which is less of a political diatribe and more of a, oh, please can I have some of my money back, sort of sourpuss. Anyway, let's not get into my views on taxing.
Well, we'll
Um,
get to that. That's not that conversation isn't that far in the future. And given the proximity between these two songs, Taxman and Think for Yourself, because this was recorded relatively near the end of the Rubber Soul sessions, it kind of slightly tilts me towards thinking maybe that maybe it does genuinely have like a political bent to it because we're very close to Taxman, which is explicitly political. However, yeah, if it's personal, it's nasty. Um, I don't know. I kind of quite like how nasty it is, though. It kind of works for me in that sense. Even songs where we've had Beatles songs where it's been about the breakup of a relationship, or two people who have split up, or the what we've referred to as the Jane Asher songs, where there are clearly difficulties in an ongoing relationship. But this is like really coming out the other side where something has gone really wrong and the result isn't oh, that's a shame we've had to split up, what shame, what shame. It's fuck you. And I kind of quite like that. Again, it's a directness and a kind of power that we haven't really seen in any other kind of Beatles songs before. And I really like that. It's not nice at all. It's vicious. But that viciousness is kind of what makes it work for me because again, that feels like something we haven't done before. It's territory we haven't stepped on.
so you like the fact that it's effectively saying I'm better than you, go away, because I mean it sort of feels, some of it feels like something that someone might say to, I'm not saying it is, there's no evidence whatsoever, but it's kind of something that a post-fame John could have said to, say, Cynthia. It's like, oh, I'm so much better than you now. I met you before I was famous. I needed you then. I don't need you now, kind of thing as well. Is that, like, look how much I've changed. You haven't changed. Sod off.
Well, or How Do You Sleep? I mean, just between John and Paul. I
Yeah.
mean, it's exactly the same kind of viciousness. It's exactly the same kind of spitefulness that exists there as well. But yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of approach, and again, especially from George of all people, I think it's really interesting to hear that. You sort of mentioned that there's that bitterness or that sourness that kind of haunts a lot of George's songs. But I kind of don't mind that. It's one of the things I quite like about George. And we all contain multitudes, and one can
Yeah.
present oneself as this enlightened individual. He's very spiritual. He's embraced his Indian philosophy and religion and all the rest of it. But at the heart, he's still a person. He still has flaws. Everybody has flaws. The point is to work towards kind of resolving them, I suppose, in his approach or in his religion. And you know, the fact that this is a feature of his songs, not a bug, is kind of fascinating. I find that sort of duality really, really interesting, and to me, it makes him interesting both as an individual and as a songwriter because he does clearly have that. This is, there are songs on Cloud Nine which are bitter, and and there are songs here which are bitter, and there will be throughout everything that sort of tracks between them, and I kind of find that fascinating.
Can a Jeff Lynne song sound bitter? A Jeff Lynne produced song, sorry.
well,
So anyway,
well, the lyric can
um,
still be better, even if the music
yeah.
will sound like everything else Jeff Lynne has ever produced.
So okay, so although I'm not a huge fan of the overall tone that he's presenting, what he is at least doing with the words is a step forward. I think we've got a structure to the verses which is I think interesting, and you've got A B C B rhyme structure going on, which is quite clever. There's probably, with two English graduates in the room, we could probably actually say what particular type of verse that is, but none of us could be bothered to look that up or even thought that it was an issue until a couple of minutes ago.
Correct.
But you've also got that kind of like the extended lines that are in there as well. So I like when you listen to it. Say for example the second verse, I left you far behind, the ruins of the life that you had in mind. So inserting those extra syllables in the middle of the line to extend it feels like something that is quite natural. He's got a lot to get off his chest. He really feels like he needs to say it. So I like that he's doing that. And I think the rhymes themselves are certainly a step away from traditional pop fare. We've, behind and mind, I like. Sea and misery, fine. We'll mention something about opaque in a moment from correspondence corner, but it's not just the obvious things that are going on. He's really I think he's choosing his words quite carefully in a way that, remember, John Lennon said a lot later on, Paul McCartney rarely did. So rather than as we've talked about a lot, having words that just sound good, there is a definite attempt to pick something that has some sort of meaning. It's just a shame that George Harrison couldn't remember what kind of meaning he was going for.
Yeah, it's very easy to pontificate about the quality of the lyric when the original composer goes, I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I
okay,
respect him for that.
that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
better to be honest about it, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the structure of this song is really, really interesting. Those extra syllables and the extra force they kind of put into the line as well really helps to kind of dial up the sense of frustration and anger in the lyric. It really adds something emotionally as well as structurally to the song.
Ooh. Well, that's good. That's good. We could actually we could say that he's delaying the inevitable rhyme in order to insert more emotion, and then that can sound quite literary, couldn't it?
Yeah, could do, could do. Two
Yeah.
English graduates in the room, you say?
Yeah. One English teacher as well.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Let's
Um,
not talk about
moving on, moving on. But
that.
it does, and all those emphasis, all the different methods of structuring this song really do add to the drive of it and the anger of it, especially in the chorus, the thing for yourself, and then you get Ringo going dun 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 before it comes in. All that it really emphasizes the anger and the frustration of the protagonist. And
Yeah.
getting onto it, but like McCartney's fuzz bass does exactly the same. It sounds unpleasant, it sounds nasty, and it's exactly what this song demands because that's precisely the emotional kind of resonance that the song was going for.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like we've transition into the musicality of it now, which I think is quite useful because mentioning the lyrics and the fact that Harrison seems to be doing something quite deliberate with his choice of language. You combine that with the use of the fuzz bass throughout the song and the fact that the bass seems to be the melodic heartbeat of the instrumentation as well. It feels like this is, for me, ignoring the use of the sitar on Norwegian Wood, because I don't really think the sitar on Norwegian wood is used as anything other than a replacement for an acoustic guitar. Really, I think we'll get on in Revolver to use of the sitar as an instrument in and of itself. This feels like a real step forward in terms of intentionality of the song and going, we are now trying something that is modern rather than something that is cloning our influences from R&B and various bits. This is, or indeed, I suppose even Dylan, this is something new, and as a result, possibly the most original song we've had on the album so far.
I think it's the most original song we've had on the album. I
There you
would
go.
definitely concur with that. And that's again, that's not a criticism of the other three songs that we've covered thus far. They're all great, and they all have elements of originality in them. But yeah, I think structurally and musically and lyrically, there's not been anything in this album which has been as forward-looking as
Yeah.
this has. And like, yeah, that double bass line, like it's easy to say, oh well, it's just like two bass lines. That is not an easy thing to achieve. And you're right, yeah. McCartney is carrying a lot of the melodic heft of the song on that fuzz bass, but it's a really buzzy kind of nasty sound that gets under your skin, and that so perfectly complements the lyric. Again, it's easy to underrate just how good a bass player McCartney is when he can deliver one bass line. Oh, and then here's this other one that also really, really adds value to the song. The song would lack something for not having that in the Beatles version. And it's incredibly powerful. It works astonishingly well. And yeah, like I said, it's so easy to underestimate how good McCartney is when he can just like, oh, it's not even one of his songs. It's just like, oh, well, there you go. And it becomes such a key component of the listening experience.
Makes you wonder if Peter Hook heard this and thought, I can be a lead guitarist on only four strings.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this song is, well, originally I thought this song was all about the bass, about the bass.
No trouble.
However, the more you listen to it, and the more, especially, I mean, certainly the bass, I think is louder in the mix than I've heard on any Beatles song so far. It also drives the melody; it's much more pronounced than on any Beatles song so far. But then you listen and you listen to what Ringo's doing is doing in the background, and you just think this is sorry, clears throat, builds up to it. The first example of the Beatles doing drum and bass. Um,
Thank you for that.
sorry, yeah, but it is. I mean, because I mean, what is John doing on this? I haven't looked at the breakdown in McDonald's book, but you sort of imagine that maybe he might be strumming along in the background. Bit of harmony going on there. That's great, but he must be sort of sitting around thinking, "Hang on a minute, this was my band, and yet I'm almost redundant in this."
According to the Standard Repository of All Knowledge and Wisdom, Wikipedia, Lennon does harmony vocals. He is playing a Vox Continental organ and guitar.
Well, that's interesting because I can't really hear any piano in there.
No,
Um,
no,
it,
it's
it,
kind of a textural thing. It's in the background, but it's not one of the primary features of the song.
yeah, it just feels as though, I mean, like with the guitar as well. There's apparently some lead guitar in there, but okay, I'm not sure what George is doing, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because McCartney and Starr are working so damn hard to really push this song forward. Without it, I think you're right that it accentuates the lyrics. Without it, I think it would feel like perhaps bitter rather than nasty. And I suspect, on reflection, if it had sounded bitter, it probably would have jarred an awful lot more.
Yeah, I think that's likely true. And the way that Ringo is holding everything together in this song is also just
Mm.
phenomenal. He's doing such good work in the background. It is a rhythmically odd song, but he just anchors everything together. And even like a couple of the chord changes, it's one thing I sort of want to mention. When the think for yourself, because I won't be there for you. A lot of the song is kind of hovering around the kind of G's and A minor, D minor, B flat. But right there, there's a jump up to an E flat. It's really unusual, and it's one of the things that gives the song this weird sort of strange texture to it. And Ringo is just battering away, holding absolutely everything together, and doing it with great subtlety. And I said banging away, that's unfair. But he's doing it with great subtlety and a real sense of his contribution. Again, like McCartney's fuzz bass, it's such a vital component of this song.
I agree. But of course, with all of that, also in the foreground, we do have George's singing. I have some questions. Let's start with my first question. Is this the most Liverpudlian voice used by the Beatles when singing?
I mean, it must be up there, right? It's the accent is coming through pretty strong, unless when they're like, intentionally forcing it, like something like Maggie May. But yeah, it's definitely up there for sure.
Okay, next question. Did George have a cold the day they recorded it?
It does sound a bit nasal, doesn't it?
It does. Some say nasal, some say flat. But
Well,
let's not quibble. And my next question is a bit of an extended one. Did Paul and John decide to harmonise the end of most lines because they knew that George was quote my quote still developing as a singer?
I'm unable to answer that question with any great degree of certainty. But we've had a lot of harmonies on this album
True.
so far. Harmonies have been a defining feature of pretty much every song we've talked about so far, and this continues that tendency. So I'm going to score that one a maybe, I think.
Okay, that's fine. George does go on to become an excellent singer. He isn't there at the moment. Um, you know, and I think he does sound quite flat in places on this, but there's also one use of the which really bottoms out and goes full on the accent and actually reminds me of, the little tiny bit of dialogue he has in the life of Brian,
Oh
where
yeah, yeah.
he's sort of doing a Liverpudlian Jewish accent. Ooh, it sounds a lot like that, a real kind of match up bit there. I think it's interesting because there are people, aren't there, who assert that one of the reasons why the Beatles had such great success, particularly in America, was because of their mid-Atlantic singing voice, the fact that they didn't try to sing with their usual accents. So it therefore had a much broader appeal. And, George will get substantially better. And If I Needed Someone is okay, but there's a lot of double tracking and harmonies going on with that, I think we'll find. Taxman is better. You might not like it lyrically, but it is better. Love You Too and I Want to Tell You also on Revolver are still a bit wonky in places with the singerness, and there are some flat notes in there. But that doesn't stop them from being excellent songs. Just like George's wonkiness here doesn't stop it from being a really decent addition to the album and one of the better album tracks the Beatles have recorded in their short career so far.
In fact, I would go so far as to say the fact that he isn't quite there yet as a vocalist might be something which actually helps this song a little bit. The vocal harmonies that sort of support him from Lennon and McCartney are of course really effective. And we've had plenty of three-part harmonies so far on previous songs that we've covered to know that that can work very, very well. But the fact that it's a bit off, the fact that it isn't quite settled, I think again kind of works with the lyric. I think the way that he's singing it is definitely flawed, and I agree he's going to become a much, much better and much more subtle vocal performer than he is here. But I kind of again, I think it kind of the nature of the lyric and the sort of incisive nature of it kind of lends itself to a performance that doesn't require absolute perfection. So I think you're right, but I don't necessarily know that it's a demerit for the song.
Well, given my fondness for what I'm going to refer to as bad singers.
I'm
Sorry,
interested to
Billy.
see this list come up, but yeah, go
Sorry.
on.
Yeah, Billy Bragg's just the one that's on the top of my head at the minute. But actually, I used to think that Terry Hall was, particularly in the specials, it kind of felt like, but actually now I think there was a performative element to the way he was singing there, because I've listened to your fault actually, I've listened to a lot of Terry Hall stuff in the last couple of weeks, whether it's Fun Boy 3, Colourfield, or solo stuff, and some of the other random bits that he's done as well. He's a really, really talented vocalist who also had a knack for harmonizing, although he's still not. There's one, there's a cover of Dana's, I think was it Eurovision winning song, All Kinds
All kinds
of
of
everything,
everything,
that
yeah.
he does a duet with Sinead O'Connor. Sinead O'Connor could sing the hind legs off a donkey, and he sounds relatively rough in comparison to her. But then when you've got someone who is just an amazing vocalist, he's always going to sound a little bit wonky in comparison. So anyway, I have a fondness for people who have character in their voices. I think Ringo at this point in his singing career has character in his voice, even when he's not being accurate. I think George is still developing it, but that doesn't make it a bad song. It kind of, maybe you could argue that the character in his song here suits the emotion that he's putting out, and that's fine. Technical singers just aren't necessarily great singers if they don't have great songs. Well, this isn't a great song; it's a really good song, and that helps.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like I said, we'll have much more to say on George Harrison singing as we move forward. But if it works for the song, then it works for the song, and that's fine. I want you, because you're mentioning singers with character. It sort of slightly leads me in a Dylan-esque direction, and so
Uh-huh.
I want to ask you about Positively Fourth Street and whether you think there is a meaningful influence on this, because you're more of I like Dylan, but you're more into Dylan, I think, than I am. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on whether you think this song really is directly influenced from Positively Fourth Street.
I don't know. I have seen that written somewhere. That may have been on Wikipedia, I think. But I think I, I would say that they are all, well, no, George and John are becoming much more influenced at writing about other things, as we'll see when it comes to, in my life, for example. And I suppose to an extent Norwegian would, but really not really. Um, and that has definitely come from Dylan. The fact that they know that they can spit out a range of emotion is, potentially coming from it. I think, no, Positively Fourth Street is so far, you know, above think for yourself, that don't know, influenced by it, maybe. Yeah, I can see why people would say that. Um, but lyrically, in terms of the performance, Positively Fourth Street is bitter, twisted, and amazing. In terms of instrumentation choice, this is a cut above. So I think this is where the band element comes in, and they sort of take an idea and then they work with it in a way that Dylan perhaps isn't able to do really at this stage. I don't know, interesting one, but I don't think it's quite as obvious as, well, let's put it this way. Dylan and George Harrison did become friends in perhaps a way that Dylan and Lennon never really did. So I think if Dylan thought that George was, plucking ideas from him and trying to copy his style, I think we would have had a riposte.
Well, that's fair, yes. And as far as I know, there isn't one. So,
No.
no. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to this song, it's I don't want to lean too heavily in this discussion now because it's something we'll get to once we cover the whole album. But having it stuck between Nowhere Man and The Word gives us a little sort of three-song triptych, which are all allegedly sort of political songs on the album, and it's very curious to see it sort of sandwiched in between two Lennon songs, which are supposedly
Mm.
saying a lot. We discussed Nowhere Man last week and weren't necessarily wholly convinced of that argument, and we'll see where we get to with the word next episode out. But again, there is an incisiveness about this, which I think is certainly better than Nowhere Man. Nowhere Man is direct, but I would never describe it as an incisive lyric. And the word is, well, I'm going to use your word, the V word, vague, in many ways. I think it's quite an unfocused lyric. But certainly one thing you can accuse this song of is being unfocused.
And I don't remember the point at which um, I listened to this album and thought, oh, there's a bunch of political songs on there. It certainly wasn't something that occurred to me for quite some time. Um, yeah, but then that's maybe the interpretation of the listener again. Maybe at that point, that's not what I was looking for in the Beatles.
No, and when it comes to something like the word, because the whole peace and love man thing is such a hippie cliche, obviously, which comes in large part from the Beatles themselves. But because it's such a cliche, like it's so easy for that to just skate on by. You don't even think of it in those terms initially, especially not when you're listening to it when you're sort of relatively young, because that's part of the whole hippie cliche, the whole '60s cliche, and it's just kind of there. Okay, it's not quite as memorable as all you need is love or whatever, but it's still there. It's still the same basic thing. So it's easy for that to kind of skip. I don't really remember that either, I have to say. It's not something I don't really know when it occurred to me, to be honest. I guess it's just sort of faded in rather than something I've snapped to awareness on.
Yeah. Um, you do wonder if the performance that you said earlier, the performance helps with that. And in that regard, it's worth mentioning it's not a huge number this is not a covered song, not one of the Beatles' more covered songs,
No.
but Pete Shelley, Buzzcocks fame, you know, punk, blah blah blah, so on and so forth, um, did cover it, although for a magazine, so commissioned. If you anyway, but his cover kind of accentuates the anger, partly because he's that kind of singer anyway, but also because there's some really kind of rough guitars that replace the fuzz bass, and it makes it have a slightly different feel. Takes away some of the relatively smooth musicality of it, and is a little bit more jarring. So that sort of adds something to the potential political side of it.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that cover version. I really like the fact that it's not just replication. Often when we talk about cover versions on the podcast, it means that either we've run out of things to say, or we just end up saying, well, yeah, this just sounds like the recorded version. This just sounds like the recorded version. Well, I mean, sometimes both. But in this case, yeah, it's a really interesting cover version, and it has a kind of anger about it, which is a big step up from the way that the Beatles version delivers that anger. That's in part because Pete Shelley has a much stronger, much more confident kind of vocal delivery than
Yeah.
Harrison has at this stage. It's a much stronger voice. But yeah, getting rid of that, getting rid of the bass and having everything driven on the guitar line really adds a drive to it as well. And it's very, very effective. It's quite a brutal cover version, but I really like it because it's doing something while still retaining the core essence of the original song.
I was quite interested to see on the Wikipedia page that there's starting to be a wider range of thoughts about the song quoted. They're drawing information from a wider range of texts. But I tell you what, there's only one person whose views I want to hear about on this song, and that's our friend Ken.
Well, it's handy that you should say that because Double N Ken has written to us. Thank you, Ken. You preempted us by writing to us in advance of our actual discussion, but Ken writes and says, "Hello, Ken here again for track 5. This is my favorite Harrison song to this point in time. The background harmonies on alternative lines are incredible. The rhythm of the song and chord structure is fabulous. The distorted bass is genius, and being able to use words like opaque and rectify is not easy. I feel like this one could have made it into and fit well into acid era songs of Revolver. It makes me wonder if perhaps this was one of the last songs to be worked out for the LP, and maybe could have slipped on there had there been more songs available, or if it inspired John and Paul in any way to get even heavier with their own compositions. If you have any insights, please discuss." Ken.
Well, no insights, but it is interesting, isn't it, to think that there's more musical experimentation from Paul going on here than perhaps on a lot of the other songs on the album as well. And I wonder if you found that a bit freeing.
I would imagine so. I mean, it is interesting, I mean, you know, Paul is quite experimental when it comes to being able to try out, different instruments, different approaches, all the rest of it. And this is definitely one of the big flourishes of that. It's, I mean, as we've mentioned, it is very very effective. And I mean, we talked about the lyrics a little bit, but I kind of agree with Ken. Like using words like opaque and rectify, that's not normal at this stage, and that's really, really interesting. This isn't just like you were talking about the rhyme structure and the sort of uneven number of syllables and lines and stuff like that. But the yeah, using those kind of words is a really interesting approach that we certainly haven't seen from George at this point.
It's often said, isn't it, that McCartney was inspired, well, Brian Wilson perhaps was inspired by Revolver to do Pet Sounds, and Pet Sounds inspired McCartney to really go for it on Sergeant Pepper. But you almost wonder then if Harrison stepping up his game a bit with something like this then leads to some of the invention that follows on Revolver after they've had a couple of months off, a short tour, a couple of months off in the studio. They've got time to read new things. They've got time to think about new things, listen to new things, experience more of the booming art scene in London. And so maybe this is a really good starting point for that, with George sort of laying down a marker and saying, you know what, I can do this. And then the follow on, not just in terms of the musicality, but lyrically, the others going, okay, hold my coat.
Absolutely. And like we discussed earlier, this was recorded relatively late in the Rubber Soul sessions. So this then leading into Revolver, we're going to see that kind of element come through a little bit later rather than it being something we'll necessarily have much occasion to revisit on Rubber Soul. But yeah, if it is that influence, and if it is that competitiveness, and if we know anything about Lennon and McCartney, we know that they are competitive. But if it is, it's like, oh shit, George has done that, right? Okay, it's time for us to pull out the bag now. Yeah, that influence would be felt on Revolver, and I think there's a credible argument that you can draw a line between those two things. Yeah.
There's also just sort of plucking another, having said that McCartney with the fuzz bass does something different on one of George's songs. Of course, on Taxman, it's McCartney's guitar solo that sort of triumphs, and also his bass line as well, that really kind of dominates that song. And you do wonder if at some point, and I think George did feel this, didn't he? It's like, oh God, will you just butt out and just let me do my thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are occasions where I think George is right, and Paul needs to back off. But there are times like that solo in Taxman where, yeah, it's kind of hard to argue with that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Ken. That is useful. And as you are aware of our schedule, feel free to help steer the conversation.
Indeed, indeed. Any other final points you want to make about this song? It sounds like we're moving into wrap-up territory.
I think we are moving to wrap up territory. I like it, love it. I like it. I think it really works. It is a really strong album track.
Well,
7.
7. Hey, excellent. Ah, you preempted me. God damn it. I'm going to go slightly higher, but again, it is only going to be slightly higher, so I'm going to go 7.5. Yeah, I agree. It's a great album track, and just a really just a really fascinating piece of music. Yeah, very interesting indeed. Really, really enjoyed that. Any final points you want to make?
7.
Hey, good. All right. I think that means no. So we'll just gradually move towards our usual conclusion, which means you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're always happy to hear from you and love to have your emails. We are also, for some reason, still on Twitter at Beatles_ology, and we're Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can also find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, and please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcast you're using so that more people can find the show. Now, the cleverest of you amongst us will know, subtly slipped into this episode so far, what we're going to be discussing next. And of course, it's going to be the word. But until then, keep listening.